Welcome back to Shelf Help, where I offer collection therapy to board gamers. My patrons have sent in photos of their sorry shelves and confessed to me their embarrassing problems, and I'm going to break my code of ethics by showing them to you, while giving them the advice they need to put the joy back into game night. And because I'm being so kind and helpful, as a little reward to myself, I'm going to make fun of them along the way. Let's get to the first hopeless case. Collection. This collection comes from Janet in the USA, and it's a really nice selection of games. But the problem is she's moving 2,000 miles away and the movers charge $1 per pound of weight. I desperately need to cut my collection, but I don't know where to start. Well, firstly, have you considered getting rid of the solid wood cabinet? Because that's got to be 100 pounds in weight on its own. So you could save loads of games if you just got rid of that. But I appreciate it is quite nice. It's just that you've overspilled into other cupboards because you can't quite fit your collection into that cabinet. I do think it's nice when people have proper furniture that they're keeping their board games in, but so often it just doesn't quite fit the size of them. Your average ticket to ride is about £3, so that's going to cost you $3 to move it. But if you were to sell it and buy it back, you'd lose like $5 or $10. So you don't want to get rid of anything that you are going to want in your new house. But there's still plenty we can get rid of. If we zoom in really close, you can see a lot of these are still in shrink. Betrayal at House on the Hill, Ghost Stories, Perspectives. And I'm always amazed at people's willpower that buy a new game and then don't open it as soon as they get it. If I'm getting a game, then I am pulling it apart and looking at it. Even if I'm not going to play it for 6 months, I still just want to look at it. That's the joy of buying a game. But this is great for you because they're going to be more valuable. If you sold them on eBay or Vinted, you're going to get a bit more for them. And those are two games that I would recommend culling. Betrayal at House on the Hill, Ghost Stories. For me, their heyday is gone. They feel dated. Ghost Stories has a lot of luck in it. Betrayal at House on the Hill is a very fragile game. You very seldom get the experience you're hoping for from it. Space Alert is a really great game, but it's tough to set up. It's a really complicated teach, so it's one that I would worry wouldn't get to the table that much. I would personally keep Escape Curse of the Temple or Rapid Response. They're much easier to get to the table as real-time cooperative games. Flashpoint Fire Rescue is a co-op game that, for me, the theme is great, but there's a lot of setup and admin, and you don't get the clever plays that you get in Pandemic. Splendor and Century Golem Edition are kind of similar-ish games. You could just pick your favorite and get rid of the other one. You've got 2 boxes of Marvel United, which compared to some people is restrained. But do you really need 2 when you've got so many other great co-op games to play instead? Okay, it's time to get ruthless. Why have you got Family Feud? I can see the message in the stars hiding at the back. Get rid of that. Dice Miner, definitely not worth it. Fort is not as good as the amazing art and theme of that game. I will never not tell people to get rid of the Isle of Cats. Sell that, and when you move to your new place, treat yourself to a copy of Patchwork. I assume you haven't played the initiative, because if you had, you would have gotten rid of it already. And Near and Far is nowhere near the storytelling game that you hope it will be. It's just a dry, boring Euro with a book attached to it, and it should be far away from your shelves. If you get rid of all of those games, you'll save $30 in moving fees. So when you get to your new house, you can buy yourself a copy of Patchwork, so the gamers in your new town will respect you. Before we look at the next collection, I want to thank CyberGhost VPN for sponsoring today's video. Have you ever worried about having your data stolen when you're connected to a public Wi-Fi in a restaurant or a hotel? It can happen, but not if you use CyberGhost VPN, which encrypts your information, so you can search for that secondhand copy of your Grail game without regret, until you play the game. 38 million users worldwide trust CyberGhost with their privacy, and they have an excellent rating on Trustpilot, so you know you'll be in safe hands. What you do online can be tracked, either by your internet provider or any public Wi-Fis you use. But with CyberGhost VPN, simply select one of their over 100 locations before you browse, and all your traffic will be encrypted, and your IP will be hidden, so you're completely anonymous. No one ever has to know that you play Monopoly online every day under the username Live Laugh Landlord. And you can use CyberGhost on 7 devices at the same time, phone, computer, or tablet. You could share it with all your friends, and then you'll still have 4 devices left over. And you know when you can't access the content you want from other countries? Well, you can use CyberGhost to change your virtual location and watch everything you've been missing out on Netflix or 40 other streaming platforms. And best of all, it's affordable. You can get all of this for just $2.03 a month and 4 months for free if you sign up today using the link in the description. It's a no-brainer to protect your privacy for the cost of, well, what's cheaper than a cup of coffee? Thanks to CyberGhost VPN for sponsoring this video. This collection comes from Peter in the UK, and this is a very special collection because this is the man that got me into modern board games. This is my friend's dad, and he's been gaming for decades. So he's got a collection that goes back to the 70s. And when I first showed an interest in games sort of 14 years ago, it was him that was introducing me to games and sort of how I knew that this whole world existed. And so this collection is very different to the others that we look at because usually we've got people who've only been into the hobby for a few years and they've just got loads of new games from the last 5 years, loads of Kickstarter games. Whereas this is the reverse. We've got hardly anything new and we've got loads of old games. He's really big into war games, 18xx games, and just some old Euro games. And there's only a few new things in there. We got Heat, and then he's clearly a Cole Wehrle fanboy with Oath and Arcs and all of the Root expansions. But Peter asks what to do about nostalgia. For years now, I've kept my collection at around 150 titles. A significant proportion of them are nostalgia titles that I hang on to because they remind me of happier times in the distant past. Lots of old school war games, monsters like Civilization or 1830. Let's face it, I have far more gaming years behind me than ahead of me, so most of these games I'll never play again, and I want to remain engaged with the hobby, which means inevitably buying some of the latest titles and of course finding room for them on my already crowded shelves. So my question is, how can I overcome my nostalgic attachments and finally say goodbye to some of these dust-gathering old friends? And I think we can all fall into that trap. I've kept games around for a decade or more because of 1 or 2 great experiences, but I haven't played it in 10 years, probably because my tastes have changed since then. This could be a look into the future for some of you. You might be new to the hobby now, but it's very easy to keep games around because of a nostalgic feeling that they give you and the memories that you had. And suddenly, decades pass, you didn't need to get rid of them, and your shelves become more of a look into the past than what you're actually playing. So what do you do about it? Well, if you've got the opportunity to play games, I find that just playing a game once can really release you of that connection you had to it. So I played a game the other day, I hadn't played it in like 10 years, called Funny Friends. I thought that I loved it, and then I played it and realized, oh wow, this is just not the kind of game I want to play anymore. Mechanically, it felt very dated. And so I got rid of it in a heartbeat because I no longer felt nostalgic. I suppose in a way that modern play of it ruined the memories that I had. And I was just very easy to get rid of it. But if you've got 50 plus old games and they're heavy and you'd have to relearn them to even play them and you just don't have the time and you know they're bad, so why waste your time playing them? Then you're going to have to find another way to let them go. Let me tell you about my t-shirt collection. So I used to really love wearing t-shirts with graphics on. I was hunting out t-shirts that I liked the look of, and I just was always very fond of my selection of t-shirts, which is funny because now all I ever wear is a white one. But eventually you'd grow out of them or they get all ratty and like holes in them and you just didn't want to wear them anymore. But you kept them because of the memory of like loving that t-shirt. Now, of course, my wife hated that. We lived in a small 1-bedroom flat. And so her advice, she's very good at getting rid of stuff, was to take a photo of it. So I'd have that memory. I'd never forget it. So that's what I did. And it worked. I took a photo and it just felt like I wasn't completely forgetting it. And of course, I've never gone back to the photos of those t-shirts to look at them once. I didn't need to keep the t-shirts. I don't even need to keep the photos, but at least they're not taking up any space in my life. And this is the thing that I think when it's in your life, it represents more of a burden of nostalgia, especially when it's on a shelf and you can see it. So I have board games on my shelves that I should probably get rid of. But by looking at them, I feel bad about the thought of getting rid of them. But as soon as they're gone, I don't regret it because I just don't think about them anymore. And the space on the shelves has been replaced by something new and exciting. And it doesn't carry that weight. Whereas if they are still in your life, they're still kind of putting that pressure on you. And I think it's worse than you just get rid of it, and I promise it won't be that bad. If a photo sounds a bit rubbish, maybe you could write a little story about what you remember about the game. Just have that memory encapsulated somewhere. You could put it on Board Game Geek so that it doesn't take up any clutter, and if you wanted to go back and remember that game, you'll know that it's always there. I love logging all the games I own on Board Game Geek, but it's also great that you can log your previously owned. So if I ever want to remember a game, I can just kind of go back through that list of all the games I've ever owned and just know that it's still there. It's doing the memory work for me. And then if it's still upsetting, maybe you could find the right person to pass it on to. I mean, with a game that old, if you sold it on eBay or Vinted, it might not actually sell, but if it did, there is someone out there looking for it, and that kind of shows that it will be going to a good home. Or you could donate it to a museum. There's a museum of board games now in Gloucestershire run by Tony Boydell, the designer of Snowdonia. I don't know if he's accepting games. Or like you've got a lot of war games. Maybe you could find a war game group that's really passionate about having a big selection and donate it to them, because it's not really about the monetary value with this stuff. It's about this kind of emotional thing. So if you could give it to a friend or a group that you knew it would be there, then it's kind of, you could visit it occasionally. For everyone else, let this be a lesson. Don't keep games around unnecessarily, because soon 5 years turns to 10 years, turns to 20 years. And when you've kept something for 20, 30 years, it's so much harder to get rid of it than if you've only had it a few. And so you're kind of building up that nostalgia. You're making it harder for yourself later down the line. Whereas if you get rid of it now, you won't think about it again. This collection is from Athena in the USA, and holy cow, there are a lot of games here. She says, I dove deep into the hobby a couple of years ago. There was a lot of games for just a few years. Ended up down the Kickstarter rabbit hole and realized it's time to curate my collection. A lot of these games are unplayed. Wow, that is a huge amount of games to have collected in the last couple of years. This looks like the collection from a board game convention, like the library, where you go and pick what you're going to play. And it really shows how much bigger games are now. You know, if you've got a more modern collection, especially if they've on Kickstarter, there's just so many big boxes that just take up way too much space. Like Critter Kitchen is not a heavy game. It doesn't need a box that big. And then you've got Isla and Something Shiny. Isn't that a kid's game? We've got a couple of soft toys on the shelf, which, judging by my last video, probably got a trick-taking card game in, so I'm not going to fall for that one again. So let's help Athena work out how to cull this collection. Let's start with those Kickstarter games, especially the big, expensive ones, because they are actually really easy to sell on. Sometimes you can even make a profit because you backed it a year ago, it's now gone out of print, nobody can get it, and a handful of people are desperate to get their hands on it, especially with any kind of Kickstarter deluxe stuff. Because she mentions that she's bought games for her 6-year-old to grow into, but I think some of these are so heavy and complicated, they might have to wait 10 years before they're going to want to play it. So do you really want to keep it around for that long? Is it really worth it? Or do you maybe sell it now and then see what your 6-year-old's into based on the other games that you're going to be playing sooner, and then you can kind of grow the more complicated games based on their tastes. And then a really easy one, let's get rid of any duplicates. You've got 2 versions of Terraforming Mars, 2 different versions of Boop. You've got the Halloween version and the normal one. You definitely don't need both. You've got 2 versions of Trekking the World, so work out which edition you prefer. And you could definitely clear out some expansions. When you have a collection this big, it feels like expansions are even less useful, because you buy expansions for variety or kind of to get deeper into a game that you love. But when you've got this many games, you've got so much more variety by just playing a different game. And how often are you really going to come back to the same game to look for that depth within an expansion when you could be playing any one of these other hundreds of games? So that's the easy calls, but then you've got to start making proper decisions. And for me, you got so many games, you're never gonna go wrong getting rid of something. You'll always have something else, often in the same genre or the same designer. There isn't time to play all of these and test them out if you're trying to get rid of stuff. So just think of any that you have played. Did you have an amazing experience? Because if you didn't, get it gone immediately. So many people will keep a game because they think, oh, maybe we played it wrong. Maybe it was just a bad time. We got unlucky. It will be good next time. I've heard great things. It has good reviews. No, if you had a bad time with it once, then absolutely you can cull it and focus on something else. You know how you feel about it. Just trust yourself. And the thing that strikes me most about this collection is so many of these games were released in the last 5 years. So many of them are going to fade into obscurity in the next 5 years. It's just this thing of you go to board game conventions, you see what's talked about on new videos. All the press is around the new games and you kind of miss the classics. They're not getting talked about because, everyone's reviewing something new. Think about what types of games are you actually getting to the table these days. Just standing in front of your collection and sort of getting a sense of, would I take that to the next game night? And is it exciting me enough to want to try it? This collection is from Paul in the UK, and I hope you're sitting down because this collection is breathtaking. And by that, I mean it's taken up all the air in the room. Paul, you don't have a board game collection, you have a board game house. Think of all the hundreds you've saved in insulation. You could use that money to buy more No, wait, don't do that. Paul, if you played one of these board games a week for the rest of your life, you'd live forever. Okay, enough with the roasting. Let's try and help Paul. He says, I'm terrified I'll get rid of a game only to want to play it 3 months later when someone mentions an obscure mechanic and I go, ooh, that's just damn, the game I got rid of. Example, I'm just about to start a campaign of Mechs vs Minions. I haven't ever played past Mission 3 and that was in 2016, but now I've finally found the right group of people to play with. I could have sold this game many times over before now, and I feel glad I didn't, but how likely is that to ever happen again? Yeah, I think you won the lottery there. That's probably never going to happen to you again. But you've kept what looks to be about 1,000 games, so you'd need to meet 1,000 people that are all suggesting obscure mechanisms that all relate to each of those games, and that's just very unlikely to happen. I think we all keep games with the hope that we'll get to play them one day and there will be some miracle situation, but it's much more sensible to keep the games that you know you can play right now. Typically, you aren't going to meet some magical person that wants to play all of your old rubbish, because most of the people you meet that are playing board games want to play new stuff. That's just kind of the reality. And as much as we like to think that you want to have a game for every situation, there just aren't that many different situations. There aren't that many different types of gamers that you need to cater for. You don't need to keep a cupboard of food for every single diet and allergy. Do you want to play it? That's the more important thing. Surely it's better to just focus on, 100, 200 that you think are amazing, rather than being overwhelmed with indecision and ending up playing something that's not as good as amazing because you decided to pull it off the shelf because you had it, rather than it being the best case game for your situation. So I think what happened with Mechs vs Minions is like a miracle scenario. That doesn't happen very often, that you're going to get to return to an old game and suddenly have loads of people willing to play it. But here and there, you could keep 10 games. Any more than that feels a bit wishful thinking. But maybe that's a way to do it. You could break it down by mechanism and just see, oh, I've got 5, 10 games in this category. If I want to have a big breadth of stuff, then maybe I only need 1 or 2. And just as long as you've got something in every category, that's a pretty diverse collection. And then his final question's the most important one. How can I get rid of them? Can I sell games with some bleached boxes? How do I best find the buyers of used games to move some of these into new homes? Well, there's a lot of different ways to get rid of games, but it can be a lot of work. So I think a lot of people get really overwhelmed by getting rid of games, which is why I would recommend to anyone to do it bit by bit. Start now and do it little by little. If you want as much money as possible back, well, that's when you got to work for it. You got to take photos of them all. Then you got to pick your prices. Typically, I would go £10 off of what it's sold for new now. But if it's damaged or sun bleached, then you probably need to discount it even more. Make sure you mention that. But there's some really great Facebook groups in the UK that are specifically for buying and selling board games. Thousands of people on them, so there's typically someone you can find for most games, and you just need to go cheaper and cheaper if it's not selling. Another way that people are selling games now is Vinted is really popular because you don't need to like print out the label yourself. You can just take it to a parcel shop and they will deal with a lot of the faff of like posting. It just makes it a bit easier. And so that's really blown up in the last couple of years, people selling a lot of like hobby board games on Vinted. eBay is still out there and they're trying to compete with Vinted. I find it a bit fussier to list games on eBay, so I might only do it with like more expensive games. But when you've got this many games to sell, you might want to try a different approach. So one would be to go to any convention with a bring and buy. So you get to take multiple games and kind of put them all on the shelves, you know, pick prices for them, and then hopefully you've got a lot of customers coming into that convention that are going to buy them. Because if they don't buy them, then you're having to take them home again. And you can do really well out of that if you set your prices right. Depending on the convention you go to, some are a bit more like, at UK Games Expo, it's very admin heavy and it's quite complicated with labels and barcodes. But at slightly smaller conventions, you just kind of write a label on, it's very quick and easy, and people will just send you the money on PayPal. And that's a really good way to get rid of games, but you probably have to go a bit cheaper if you don't want to then take them home again. In the UK, there are these companies that have popped up. Tabletop Rescue is one that actually will buy your whole collection, anything that you want to sell, as long as it's like 100 games, and they will then sell them on. So they're going to buy them at a much decreased rate of what they're worth. You know, they'll pay you like 40, 50% of what they will then sell them for, but they're going to take away all the effort for you. They might even come to your house and pick them all up from you. So that's just a really good way to offload loads of games if you're not too worried about how much you're making and you just want them gone. This collection comes from Pavel in Poland, and he's got one problem. And apparently it's not that he's wasting space with a retro video games console, and it's not that he's got a copy of Gloom, and it's not that he's put a little blanket over his printer to make Squirtle feel more at home. No, his problem is that he's got a group of 6 friends, but they're bored of Dixit, Sushi Go, and Saboteur, and the only new games they play are Spicy and Suro, but they're both very short in playtime. We don't have a proper time sinker. What 6-player games with an average 2 hours playtime would you recommend? Well, first of all, have you considered Murder? Because 6 players is just the worst player count to try and satisfy. At the very least, you could hook up one of your friends with a really clingy new partner that just never lets them come to game night, because 5 players is just so much easier to deal with. The obvious pick is Heat Pedal to the Metal, the racing game, because it's good from 3 to 6 players, and it's rare to find a game that says it can play 6 players that's actually fun at 6 players. But with Heat, you've got more cars on the track, there's more interaction on the board, and so it will go a bit longer, probably around the 2-hour mark. It works with that many players, and so many other games just really bog down the more players you add. Another one that really sings at 6 players is Libertalia Windsor Galecrest, because it's all about the interaction between the players. And so the more different factions there are, the more chaos and interesting moments you're going to get. In a 3-player game, it's just not going to be that fun, but with 4, 5, and 6, you just have a lot more of the joy from the game. But even Libertalia isn't going to take you to 2 hours, but I don't think you should necessarily look for a longer game, but just a meatier game. And those are much meatier than Suro and Spicy. But if you did want to go longer, then Western Legends is one that I'd recommend. It's a sandbox game set in the Wild West. You play as a cowboy, and you can choose to either be a good guy, be a sheriff, and try and arrest other players, or be an outlaw, rob banks, and do all sorts of terrible things and get points that way. Again, has a good amount of player interaction because the sheriffs are trying to catch the bad guys are sometimes like holding up the good guys. There's loads of different stuff you can do in that game. It's got a real like emergent narrative. Everything you do tells a story. It might even be longer than 2 hours, especially with 6 players. It's an example of a game that's probably better at 4 or 5, but you can play it at 6. And then my final pick is the new version of Lords of Vegas. This is my second favorite game of all time. It's a brilliant negotiation game where you're building casinos, you're trying to expand them to make more money and points. You're trading locations with each other, trading casinos, and also trying to steal casinos off of each other. It's just got so much great negotiation in the game and a good amount of luck that just makes it really entertaining. And there's just so many like big takeovers and big moments that make it really great. You could play a game of this in like an hour, but realistically, with all that negotiation, it's lasting 2 hours or more. And the original version only played 4 players, and then you could get the expansion up, which would take it to 6 players. But now the new version has that built in, and so the base game is up to 6 players. And it's great, except it's really hard to get a hold of. I don't even have a copy of it, so good luck. This collection is from Daniel in Colombia, and he says, I teach English as a foreign language, and I've been using board games as a tool for my classes because they allow students to use their language in a different and meaningful way. I think that the best games for that are word games like Codenames. I would love if you could also recommend some other word games besides the one I already have. Well, Daniel's already got some great ones if anyone's looking. Just One is such a brilliant, simple word game that's cooperative, where you're all trying to get one person to guess one word, and you all have to come up with a word that's similar, but if anybody writes the same thing, they get crossed out, and so you've really got to think around the houses. It's like you're all trying to use your own internal thesaurus to get something that's different from everyone else. Phantom Ink would be really good because you're spelling out each word letter by letter, only getting little fragments of words, and then trying to spot what they are. Concept is another one that's great for different languages because you're focused on these clip arts that represent kind of concepts, and you're trying to connect them together to give clues about certain words. Trap words would be really interesting because you're trying to communicate a word without saying obvious words. So you've got to be really creative with how you're describing something. I really like banned words, which is effectively the same game, but just a smoother experience. Of the games you don't have, Word Slam would be really good. It's all about trying to communicate a word or an idea by using these really simple words like nouns and adverbs and adjectives. You've got these little decks of cards. So if I was trying to communicate a tree, I might be like green, long, wooden. It's a really interesting challenge for the clue giver, and then the guessers are just trying to decipher this thing. And so it uses very simple words that probably they will have already learned, but it's the way they're using them and kind of the context of all of it that's probably really interesting for someone that's new to the language. My other tip would be Anomia, because it's all about trying to think of words as quickly as possible. You're flipping cards, and as soon as a symbol matches between 2 players, you have to shout out a word as quickly as possible. And you might have to shout out a type of breakfast cereal, they have to shout out a famous author, and whoever gets theirs quicker wins the card. So it's really about thinking on your feet, which is obviously quite a big challenge in your second language. He then says another type of game that would allow people to have fun and practice and use English are negotiation games, but I only own Sheriff of Nottingham and it hasn't been played by a lot of people because it's kind of long and people don't try to take risks and lie. Therefore, I've been thinking about getting Zoo Vardis because the theme and the duration would appeal to more people, but getting games in my country is not easy. They tend to be very expensive or difficult to find. Yeah, it's tricky, especially with a game like that was on Kickstarter, maybe a slightly smaller company. They might not have such wide distribution, so it might be that it reaches you much later or just never becomes available. I think Bonanza could be a good negotiation game that you're more likely to be able to get hold of. You are trading different types of beans. It's probably not shorter than Zoo Vardis, it might be a bit longer, but it's still on the simpler side of things and doesn't require bluffing like Sheriff of Nottingham. This collection comes from Andrew in Norway, and wow, do we have a lot of games here. We have got a full-on 5x5 Kallax that is just jam-packed with games. It reminds me of some of my first gaming shelves, in that every single tiny space is packed with a game, that there's no order to these shelves, there's no organization by genres or mechanism. It's just about this fits in with this, and so that's why it lives together, because it's just maximizing every single gap. And what strikes me is we've just got a full-on omni-gamer here. There are a real contingent of war games, but we've got crime games, we've got some heavy Euro games like Container and old school Euros like Puerto Rico, but then we've got like the thematic American games like Nemesis and Star Wars Rebellion. There's a fair amount of family weight games. Perhaps there are games in this collection that aren't quite as popular as others, but they've just kept around. I meet a lot of people that are like, oh, I'm still very much in my collecting phase. I've never got rid of anything. And my top tip to anyone out there is start getting rid of games you don't like as soon as possible, because the longer you leave it, the bigger the weight of the problem is. And even like bring and buys now at conventions, they will limit how many games you can sell at that bring and buy. So you can't just offload like 100 games at once. And selling like 5 or 10 games isn't too much work. But selling 100 games, especially if you want to get the value from them, is just so much admin that you just end up not doing it. And then it becomes 200 games that you need to get rid of. So I think curate as you're building the collection. As soon as you play something you don't like, get rid of it. There are major benefits to kind of keeping as small a game collection as possible, and that is that you will ultimately play games you like more. Andrew says, I really like the fact that I have a range of games to cover most situations, but I realize that I probably need to downsize a bit. Some of the games shown here I bought very early on in my board game collecting days, been at it 15 years now, and I bought some of them based too much on the BGG Top 100 in years gone by when I didn't really know what my tastes were yet. Yeah, I spotted Puerto Rico and Twilight Struggle in there, which were both #1 on Board Game Geek at some point, but both not necessarily games for everyone, certainly weren't for me. And I think we've all been there. We look at that list and we think it just must be the ultimate game, so you end up buying something you don't really know anything about and have a terrible time with it. But I think the lesson here is just to move on from them. You play it once or twice, it's not for you, that's okay. And if you are out there and you're still filling up your collection, then definitely don't look at the Board Game Geek Top 100. Much better to, well, watch reviewers, but also get recommendations from friends, people that you know like the same things as you. I also have some games that right now are harder to get played, as both my friends and I have young kids, and so we're not quite at the stage in life where we have our afternoons free again and can play longer games. But I'm hopeful that in a few years, the kids will be off playing with their friends all day and our gaming nights won't have to be squeezed into an evening all the time. And yeah, it's clear there are a lot of longer thematic games on these shelves. You've got Rex, Merchants and Marauders, even something like Lords of Vegas, Nemesis. Like, these are all beefy games that are struggle to fit around kids. Even and I'm doing this as a job, I would recommend, if you can, get away for a weekend, that a board game convention that's all about just playing games, not about, seeing all these booths, that is just play games all weekend. They are so good for playing the games like this. The last time I went to one of these, I played Battlestar Galactica, Cyclades, Thief, and New Angeles all in one weekend. These are all games that last 3, 4, 5 hours. It was probably a bit too much in the end, but I was really taking advantage of that opportunity that I never get. I totally feel for you. You really want to keep those games around because you believe that your life is going to come back to it. I'm not sure how accurate it is. My kid's only 2 years old, so I don't know if that time will come back to you, or maybe you do need to kind of slowly learn that you need to switch your habits to other things. Now, obviously, you're always going to keep your 1 or 2 favorites around. For me, Game of Thrones sits on my shelf. I hardly ever play it, but it's there because of those memories. You've got to realize that those opportunities are so few and far between now. Where in the ranking are they? If they're going to get picked after, 5 other games, then you probably shouldn't own it anymore, because it's going to be 6 months to a year that those opportunities come along. Realistically, you could play Game of Thrones and then wait 6 months and play it again because it's your favorite one. And, the one that's 5 games less good than that is just not going to get a look in. And some of these games are so old now that they're out of print and you might, make some money of it. But of course, then you're terrified that you'll never be able to buy it again when your kids end up at university and you're free and retired and you've just got all this amazing time to play board games all day. But at that point, there will have been 20 years of games released in the interim, and surely some other good games will have come along, not to mention that they will have reprinted all of those titles, possibly with worse artwork and a terrible anthropomorphic animal retheme. Andrew asked the ultimate question, which of his games would I get rid of and why? So we're going to try and race through it, not hurt too many feelings. I would get rid of Get Bit. If it's not that good, then it shouldn't be in your collection. Just because it doesn't take up much space, it's still just taking up energy in your collection. Archaeology, I feel, is too lucky. I would get rid of that. Arctic Scavengers, I just feel like there are better deck building games, and that one takes a long time. It's got some fun ideas, but I just feel like we've moved on from that. I've never played Combat Commander, but do you really need that and Combat Commander Mediterranean? And that's just a general rule. I see that you've also got Endeavor, Deep Sea, and Age of Sail. Like maybe just one Endeavor game. I would get rid of any Tiny Epic games. Mapomenos, I've never even heard of, but I would be amazed if that is a good game. Taverns of Tiefenfall is like a fun theme, but I just don't think like good enough. Like you want it to be better than it is. Monikers is a fun game. I used to have that big box as well, but it's just not conducive to take to a party. And when you're going to a party or you've got this like light experience, just like sort of bring out this huge box of cards, it just doesn't really fit. And I just don't think the amount of times you play that game, you need that much variability. You probably do want some of these war games, but you do have a lot of them, so I'd maybe trim that down. Meeple Land is a game that I have recommended, but I don't know if it holds up to other sort of family weight games. 13 Days, I would personally prefer to play Watergate. Carcassonne South Seas, I'm intrigued that you've only got that one. I've never played it, but I wonder if that is the best version of Carcassonne. Escape from Aliens Out of Space is a fun idea that I just think is too much of a fragile game that you don't consistently get the experience you want from it. Zoo Tycoon, he actually mentions in the email as being like, he liked the video game. It sounds rubbish, get rid of it. Feed the Kraken is a fun game, but that box is so big. Suro, no, get rid of that. Ghost Stories for me is just way too hard and annoying, but you know, if you're into that. Homebrewers, I'm not convinced by. I see Under Falling Skies at the bottom, which is one of the only solo games that I've spotted. So I just wondered, did you get that because you were trying to get into solo games? Because you've probably got a lot of other games that you could play solo. So you need that like dedicated solo game. Sunrise City at the bottom, I wouldn't keep around. And Nemesis, I mean, you've got these two massive big boxes, and he says that he wants to get rid of one of them. So yeah, I think that's probably a good idea. The fact that you're taking up an entire Kallax cube with one game, although what can I talk? I've got Foundations of Rome. Yeah, a fair few games I get rid of, but let him know in the comments which games of his that he should get rid of. And then he asks, are there any games you can think of that might appeal to me based on my collection? I would say you got a couple of Knizias in there, but you don't have Ra, and I just think that it kind of fits. You clearly like some strategy. I get the sense you like player interaction more than not. There's not too many games without it. So I think Ra is kind of a missing piece there for me. Foundations of Metropolis would be a nice like city building one that's got player interaction, kind of that family weight thing, so it's not too long. You know, we are talking about the fact you've got kids, you don't have loads of time to play. So I think that one would fit your collection nicely, especially in that kind of top left corner with like Quadropolis and Ticket to Ride. And then I was thinking, if you did want one of these like bigger thematic games, but you're just sad that you can't get Merchants and Marauders to the table, then you might try Western Legends, because I feel like that probably is about half the length of Merchants and Marauders and way less rules to remember and teach every time you get it out. Don't introduce any expansions, don't overcomplicate it. I think it is a lot smaller and you still get that fun sandbox experience of doing whatever you want, getting in other people's faces, telling a story, and you could get that done in an evening and, you know, might give you the same kind of satisfaction. Thanks for watching the second episode of Shelf Help. If you'd like to send me your collection dramas to solve, then become a patron of the channel at patreon.com/actuallol. I'm John Perkis. Thanks for watching. And remember, you can protect your privacy online with CyberGhost VPN for only $2.03 a month and 4 months free using the link in the description. Thanks to CyberGhost for sponsoring this video.